I was younger, I would just step up right there. I wouldn't walk up the steps, but no more. Sure do appreciate everyone's presence tonight. We're glad you're here. It's holiday weekend. Today's Veterans Day, of course. School was out, and I'm sure there are a lot of people that are traveling and camping and doing other things, but we're glad that each one is here this evening, especially glad for your presence. I appreciate those who have led us in our worship tonight, leading the songs and the prayers, and the good participation on everybody's part. Worship, of course, is a participation activity. It's not a spectator activity, and so everyone needs to participate, and one way we do that, of course, is through the singing, but we want to be involved in the prayer and the sermon as well. We participate with our mind in some of those things, but it's definitely participation activity, and we appreciate the way we've done it tonight. Been very, very encouraging. Of course, my family has a long history with the church here. My daddy was the first preacher, the first regular preacher here at Oak Mountain. We moved here in 1958. I was born in 1957, so I was 1 year old here. Little red-headed boy. I know that doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, but little red-headed boy running around, and who would have thunk that as a gray-haired man I would be standing in the pulpit and preaching. We lived in the house right over there, of course, and we lived here. I went to first grade at the old Pleasant Grove, the wooden building that was torn down several years ago, and then we moved away from here. And my wife, Cherry, her daddy, Dwight Edwards, he preached here for several years as well. And so we've had a long connection with the church here. And I appreciate the invitation to come and be a part of this effort, and hope that I'll hold up my end anyway and have some good things to say, some good things for you to think about. I appreciate the prayer that was offered on my behalf. When I pray, get up on Sunday mornings and go early to the church building and kind of sit down and have time of quiet, look over my lesson, read through the bulletin, things like that. But my prayer is that the Lord will help me to say what He wants me to say in the way that He wants me to say it. And so that's my prayer tonight. And so you can pray that prayer as you're listening. Help Bob say what you want him to say in the way that you want him to say it. All right, so let's begin our study together this evening. And so we're going to pick up in the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to take our text from a passage at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And as we begin, I just want to show you a few pictures. These are not unfamiliar pictures. These pictures like these we've seen, well, many times. To advance, you've seen pictures like that. Here maybe is a community where a tornado has gone through, and the house, you see some of the houses are standing, but others they've just been obliterated. They've just completely fallen, completely crashed. Here's another very similar picture. And like I said, we've seen these pictures before. Maybe not these specific pictures, but pictures like them. In fact, you've had this in Pleasant Grove. I didn't think about that till this moment. That right here in Pleasant Grove, you've seen things like this in the not too distant past. And here's another similar picture of a house that's just been blown by the wind and it's just completely demolished. These next couple of pictures are taken from Florida in the last couple of days. And so the Hurricane Nicole has come through Florida, and these houses are built on the coast. And you can see where the waves from the sea have eroded the sand. This house is built on the sand, basically. And so the waves have eroded the land, have eroded the sand, and the house is in danger of completely falling. And you can see here on my right, your left, I guess, where some of that, maybe a swimming pool, has fallen because of the sand being washed away. And here's another very similar picture, and these houses may be in worse shape than the previous one. But it doesn't have to be like that. You can build a house in Florida in the sand that's prepared for the hurricanes or the tornadoes or the winds and the rain and the flood. And so you got to start out with a foundation, something like this, and you can see concrete pillars are poured. And then you have to build it out of the right kind of material. On that foundation has to be constructed in the right way, and the right materials that are not so easily blown and ruined. And then finally kind of end up with a nice house, looks like this. And so you can build a house that's susceptible to the damage of the wind, or you can build a house that will be strong and stand when the wind comes along. Well, it doesn't take very long to figure out what passage I'm talking about, does it? At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7, Jesus in verse 24 says, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them or does them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on a rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and yet it didn't fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them or does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." And so Jesus is bringing his sermon to an end, kind of summarizing, making a final point. And he talks about building your house. We're going to talk about building our home in heaven, but the idea is that we are now building our home in heaven. And so just like we store up or lay up treasure in heaven, and we're doing that here and now, so we're sort of building our home in heaven by the way we live now, and the kind of life, the kind of living that we do now. So we are now preparing for that home in heaven. And the way we prepare for that is by following the words of Jesus in this particular passage. Well, when Jesus says, I'm going to just ask about 3 questions of this particular passage. The first question is, well, what's the message that Jesus is teaching here? What's the idea that he's trying to get across? And who is the messenger? I realize that's 2 questions, but that's the way we're going to approach it here in the beginning. Well, what's the message? What's Jesus trying to say here? What idea is he communicating? Well, the passage contains kind of a story, doesn't it? The passage doesn't use the word parable, but it's kind of a parable, isn't it? And it's a little short story. It doesn't have a whole lot of detail to it. It talks about 2 men and 2 houses, and what happens to the 2 houses under certain circumstances. So there's a little story there, a little parable there. And so one man, he's called a wise man, he builds his house on the rock. And then the winds come and the floods come and the rain falls, but his house stands fast. Now there's a foolish man, and he builds a house as well, but he builds his house on the sand. And so it's almost like he just, instead of digging down like we saw in the picture, he just kind of builds his house right on the top of the ground, and the ground is sand. And then when the rain comes and the winds blow and the floods rise, well then his house falls. Well, we understand Jesus is not really talking about home construction, is he? That's not really what he has in mind. That's what he's trying to communicate. He's not trying to teach us about wise home building. He's trying to teach us something about the way we live our lives. He's talking about developing a way of thinking and a way of living that's controlled by his teaching. A life that will remain faithful to him even when threatened by the most dangerous and threatening forces to our spiritual well-being. So that's what he's talking about. How do we live? And what he's saying is, if you'll develop your thinking and if you'll shape your behavior according to my teaching, you can withstand even the most dangerous, threatening spiritual forces that you'll ever face. If you just do what I tell you to do, if you just think the way I tell you to think, doesn't matter what happens, you'll be able to withstand it. So that's the message. Now that's not hard to figure out. We understand that Jesus isn't talking about how to build your house. He's talking about how to think and how to live and what kind of lifestyle to lead. And he says, if you'll do it the way I tell you to do it, well then you can endure any hardship, any struggle that comes along. Well, somebody might say, who does he think he is to make a statement like that? Who does this man think he is to say, you do it the way I tell you to do it and you'll be a success? You think the way I tell you to think. You can ignore all these others out here. You do it the way I tell you to do it. And you can endure. You can overcome. You'll be a success. So exactly who does this man think he is to assert his authority like that? What right does he have to make such a statement? And you know what? This is not the only time Jesus makes statements like this. In John chapter 14 and verse 6, here's another. It's really a very bold statement. Now, we might be accustomed to it because we're Bible students and we've come across this and even quoted it many times. But when you stop to think about it, this is a bold statement. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. The audacity of a man to say something like that. Who does he think he is? What gives him the right to make such a statement? Here's another one, Matthew chapter 11, and we'll begin in verse 25. At that time Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you've hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for this was well-pleasing in your sight. Now all things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father. Nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal him. You see what Jesus is saying? Nobody knows the Father like I do. And the Father knows me in a unique way as well. We have a relationship with each other that no one else has or ever will have. Again, what a bold statement. And it's based on that Jesus goes on to say, verse 28, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now, sometimes we emphasize, come to me, and I'll give you rest. But we can just as validly stress the other part, come to me. After all, I'm the one with a unique relationship with the Father, and I will give you rest. He goes on, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I'm gentle and humble in heart, you'll find rest to your souls. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. So again, another very bold statement. So you see, we're not really doing anything inappropriate when we stress the idea there in Matthew chapter 7 that Jesus says, if you hear my words and do them, if you listen to me and do what I say, your house, your life will be strong and you'll be able to endure. In John chapter 12, Jesus says in verse 44, he cries out and says, he who believes in me does not believe in me, but in him who sent me. And he who sees me sees the one who sent me. I've come as light into the world so that everyone who believes in me will not remain in darkness. There are lots of statements like that made by Jesus in the New Testament. And so if someone were to make that kind of statement today, let's say a politician comes along, and actually they do make these kinds of statements, don't they? Many of us would say, what an arrogant man or woman. What conceit. And I think that kind of arrogance or boldness or conceit would turn a lot of us off. But when we consider who Jesus was, or who Jesus is, might be a better way to say that, we understand that he did indeed have the authority, have the right to say these things. And so who is Jesus? Let's just take a minute to think about that. If Jesus is saying, the wise man hears my words and does them, and when the rains come and the winds blow, his house stands strong. But if you ignore my words, well then your life is going to come crashing down. Well, who is this man who makes such bold statements? Well, I really like what Nicodemus says over in John, the 7th chapter, in verse 51. They're thinking about what to do with Jesus. And Nicodemus speaks up. They want to seize him. They want to silence Jesus. Kind of want to do away with him. And Nicodemus, remember Nicodemus from John chapter 3 came to Jesus by night. You remember that? Well, here we read about him again in the book of John, verse 50. Nicodemus, the one who came to him before, being one of them, said to them, now our law doesn't judge a man unless it first hears from him and knows what he's doing, does it? Well, there's a novel thought, isn't it? Before we condemn this man, we ought at least hear what he has to say and think about what he's been doing. And so we can evaluate a person based on what he says and what he does. And so let's think about Jesus in that way. What did he say and what did he do? In Acts chapter 1, you find a similar statement in the very opening verse. Acts chapter 1 and verse 1, Luke writes, the first account I composed, Theophilus, about all that Jesus began to do and teach. That's all you need to know, isn't it? What did he do and what did he teach? What did he say? What did he do? Tell you a lot about a person, won't it? Well, we don't have time. That'd make a pretty good series of lessons, I suppose, to think about that in detail. But I'll tell you what we can do. We can think about what people who encountered Jesus said about him. People who did listen to what he had to say and think about what he did. And so let's do that. Let's think about what people thought about Jesus who heard him speak, for example. Well, you don't have to go any further than Matthew chapter 7, do you? Matthew chapter 7, verse 28. When Jesus had finished these words, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he is teaching them as one having authority and not as the scribes. There is something different about this man. We can tell by what he's saying. And it's not his deep, resonant voice, I don't think, that is so impressive. I don't know that he had that kind of voice. It's the content of what he said. It's the way that he phrased things and said things and the implicit claims that he makes in what he said. Well, you've heard that it was said of old time, this and this and this, but I say to you. You say there's the authority, isn't it? But I say to you this. And those who considered what he had to say came away amazed. This man is different. He doesn't speak like we're used to hearing people speak, like the scribes. Oh, he's unique. Back in John chapter 7, talked about the opponents of Jesus wanting to do away with him and neutralize him and seize him and take him away. And so they sent a deputation to him, and the deputation was sent to this group of people sent to seize Jesus and bring him back. And they didn't do it. They didn't get him. They didn't seize him. And so those who sent them asked them, well, why didn't you bring him back? That's in verse 45. Why didn't you bring him? And the officers answered, never has a man spoken the way this man speaks. I like the older versions, never man so spake. We listen to him. There's something different about him. He doesn't speak like people we're used to listening to speak. And so that's what people who heard him speak said about him. There's something different about him. We've listened to him. Well, what did people conclude when they listened to him speak and considered what he did? So just think about the various works of Jesus. That would include his miracles, but I don't know that his works would be limited to his miracles. Jesus says in John chapter 5 and verse 36, the testimony which I have is greater than the testimony of John. The works which the Father has given me to accomplish, the very works that I do, testify about me that the Father has sent me. Well, people who spent time with Jesus, who listened to him, who watched him, well, what did they say about him? Well, again, don't have time to go into a lot of detail, but in John chapter 1, John the Baptist says, he's the Son of God. And in John chapter 1, verse 41, Andrew tells his brother Peter, we found the Messiah. Nathanael in John chapter 1, verse 49 says, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. Nicodemus, you remember we referred to him a moment ago. Here at John chapter 3, he spends a little time with Jesus. He's considering what Jesus has to say. He's considered his works. You know, no one can do the things that you do unless God is with him. And he said, we know that you're a teacher from God. You're a teacher from God. The woman at the well says in John chapter 4 and verse 29, can this be the Christ? And when the Samaritans who lived in that city went out and spent some time with Jesus in John chapter 4 and verse 42, they said, We know who you are. You're the Savior of the world. Who is this man that says, if you do it the way I tell you to do it, if you think the way that I tell you to think, if you say the things I tell you to say, if you live your life according to my teaching, you will stand, you will endure, you will persevere no matter what comes your way. Who is this man who says that? Who has the authority, the right? He's the Son of God. That's who he is. He's the King of Israel. He's the Messiah. He's the Christ. He's the Savior of the world. He has a unique relationship with God. He knows the Father in a way that no one else ever has or ever will. And the Father knows him in a unique way as well. And so he has every right to make a statement like this. If you listen to me and do what I tell you, nothing will be able to move you away from fellowship with God. You see, the validity of the message is not in the logic of the message. Although it's very logical, of course. The validity of the message is grounded on the identity of the messenger. It's true because Jesus said it. It's true because these are the words of God with us. Well, our second question is this. That's our first question of the passage. Our second question is, what's the rain, the floods, and the winds? Well, again, I don't know that this is a mysterious symbol or figure of speech or anything like that. It's really pretty obvious, I think, to most of us who read this. We understand what Jesus is communicating with this figure, with this picture in words. These are elements that can destroy a house completely. It's really amazing, isn't it, the power of water. You know, we go into the house, we turn the water on, wash our hands, or we wash the dishes, or take a shower or a bath. You know, you get a lot of water and at a high rate of speed, and it's rushing through the street. It's going to tear the house down. And so what Jesus is saying, what he's referring to here, are the destructive issues in our lives, the circumstances and problems and challenges that can destroy our lives, that can destroy our spiritual well-being and really bring us to spiritual ruin. That's what he's talking about. And so you do what I tell you to do. You listen to my words, follow my teaching. When the challenges of life come your way, when the issues that pose a spiritual danger to you, that can ruin you, that can destroy your spiritual well-being, if you build your house on the rock, follow my teaching, you'll be able to withstand that. You'll be able to persevere. Remember that house the last house that we put up there with a strong foundation and the concrete columns and built of the very strong materials and really built to withstand the hurricane and the tornado and the floods, built up off the ground. You see, those people know about the storms that are coming, and they're prepared. And if we can know about the storms that are coming, and we do what Jesus tells us to do, we might be battered around a little bit in some ways, but we'll persevere, we'll endure. Notice that at least two of these things, not at least two of these things are plural, aren't they? I noticed that as I was preparing. Now the rain is singular, but the winds, plural. The floods, plural. What's that suggest to you? Anything? I mean, is that just sort of a coincidental way of expressing the idea? Well, I think what Jesus may have in mind is you're going to face not a trial in life, but trials. The floods, plural, are going to come. The winds, plural, are going to buffet you about. And so you're going to face challenges over and over, more than one. Now, seems like some people just face them over and over and over and over and over. And so I don't know that we all experience the same number of trials in our lives, but most of us will experience something or maybe multiple things that challenge our faith, challenge our allegiance to God, challenge our loyalty, make us wonder, should I continue, should I persevere, or should I just give it up? Now I want to spend a few minutes talking about some specific things that challenge us. It's one thing to talk about the rains and the floods and the winds. Well, let's think about what are the specific things that we face in our lives that challenge us. I'm talking about challenging us spiritually. Well, let me just suggest one, and this is a general way, going to be more specific. I'm a firm believer that discouragement is a tremendously effective weapon in Satan's arsenal. A person gets discouraged. She's just about ready to give it up. It's kind of like an athlete. Here's an athlete, and they're trying to get some playing time. They're trying to get on the field during the game, and they practice, and they do pretty well, but here's a guy, and he makes a mistake in practice, and the coach yells at him. Well, that kind of bothers him, but he shrugs it off, and he gets out there again, and he makes another mistake, and the coach yells at him even harder this time. And now he's getting to him, but he gets out there and he gives it his best shot. He makes another mistake, and the coach gets in his face and yells at him, says, "You're worthless. You're no good. I don't know why you're on this team. I don't know why you come out here. You'll never see the field." And when the guy gets discouraged, he's done. Philip, is that right? He's done. I'm not going to play. I can't please the coach. And he might as well just go and sit on the bench. Same thing is the case with Christians. When you get discouraged, when you think, what's the use in trying? It's not going to work out for me. I'm not going to succeed. No matter how hard I try, I cannot do it. And you get discouraged. Well, you're in danger. And here are some things that discourage us. We face financial problems. You ever known anybody, maybe you've been in this position where you think, why is God not taking care of me and my family? I'm trying, I'm working hard, I'm trying to do it the right way, I try to be a good worker, I'm honest. Why is it so hard for me? Why is it so hard for us? Now I know that's a problem, that's a really old problem in fact, because of one passage, for example, the 73rd Psalm. Do you remember that psalm, the 73rd Psalm? Verse 2, the psalmist says, "But as for me, my feet came close to stumbling, and my steps had almost slipped. I was envious of the arrogant. I saw the prosperity of the wicked." And he goes on to describe them all. And then he says, what's the use? Verse 13, "Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure." I just about stumble. I'm out here working hard. I'm trying the hardest I can. I can barely make ends meet. Some months I run out of money before I run out of month, you know. Now look over here. There's a guy over here. He doesn't care about God in the least. He's got a great life. Why am I still doing what I'm doing? Why don't I just do what he does? Things will be much better. And that kind of financial storm discourages us. And we're in danger. Relationship problems. You know, I thought about Elijah, 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 10. All alone. I'm the only one left. They're seeking my life. I might as well just give it up. You ever feel that way? Maybe you're in a relationship and you think things are going well, and then a relationship is broken off and you think, nobody cares about me. Nobody's concerned. I got no support. I'm out here all by myself. I got no one to turn to. Well, what's the use? What's the use in trying? Those can be very discouraging, those kind of situations. Family problems. Family problems can be overwhelming. I thought about David back in 2 Samuel chapter 19. Remember, Absalom has risen up and rebelled against his father. And Absalom is killed in battle. You remember that? Absalom is killed in battle. David's response at the end of chapter 18, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, Absalom, my son, my son." Carried on like that for a while. Remember what Joab tells him? Look, David. Joab could talk to David even though he was the king. He could talk to him pretty straight. Look, buddy, you need to get your act together. People see you acting like this, they're not going to fight for you. And so that family issue, that family problem discouraged David to the point where he wasn't an effective leader anymore, at least at that time. And our family situations can leave us discouraged and weighed down to the point where we lose the motivation to serve. We lose that motivation to serve God. Health, injury, illness, death. Either we get a bad diagnosis and we face, a really bad future, or we see a loved one suffering. And we think, what is going on? Yeah. Well, what's going on here? Here, I've been trying to do what's right, or here's this loved one of mine. I know his character. I know her character. They've served God faithfully all their lives, and now they have a terrible, terrible disease. I used to think nobody suffered like Job suffered. I don't know that I really think that anymore. I mean, there are people who suffer tremendously in this life, and it can be discouraging. We can wonder, we can think, what is God doing? And we lose our motivation. We question our faith. We question our commitment. If this is the way it's going to be, why should I continue? Sometimes we are disappointed by our brethren. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 26, Paul, there's that catalog of things that Paul endured as a Christian, but one of those things is dangers from brethren. In Philippians chapter 1 and verse 7, there Paul talks about those who are preaching Christ from strife and envy, hoping to raise up dissatisfaction with him. He has to deal with false brethren. He has to deal with inconsistent brethren. We deal with church division or Christians who are not what they should be. Don't put your confidence in men. It might be an exaggeration, an overstatement, but they will disappoint you every time. You can't put your faith in men. How many times have we seen it? Here's a faithful preacher, he appears to be a faithful preacher, he stands in the pulpit and preaches, and we sit and we're engrossed by his eloquence, and we learn that he's involved in some kind of inappropriate relationship, and we're devastated. Or an elder, or a deacon, or leading member of the congregation, or one of the wives. You see, you can't put your faith in men. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve, and he will never disappoint you. Resistance to our faith and spiritual commitments can wear us down. The wind, the floods, the rain can take that form. I'm trying to do what's right, and I go to work, and all I get is ridicule. People don't appreciate it. I'm ostracized and made fun of, and people challenge me constantly, and it wears us down. They think it's strange that we don't behave like they do, and they malign us. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 4. Well, don't be weary in well-doing. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9. Eventually, in due season, we'll reap if we don't faint. And then constant temptation can wear us. Isn't that one of the floods or the rain or the wind, that constant temptation that nags at us and nags at us? And we try our best to overcome it and subdue it and control it, but it's always there. It's always tugging at us. It's always nagging at us. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 talks about the sin that doth so easily beset us. And we've all got that sin, don't we? We all have that temptation. And how often do we just say, well, I give up. I'm just going to yield. Well, sometimes we do. There are sins that enslave us. Titus 3 and verse 3 speaks of the fact that we were slaves to various desires and pleasures. Slaves to various desires and pleasures, especially habit forming or addictive behavior. And we just grow tired of fighting the fight. And we And so the storm that Jesus talks about, the wind, the rain, the floods, takes different forms in our lives. And we've talked about some of those, but we just can't give up. You see, if we will build our house on the rock, we can endure all of that and we'll have a home in heaven. And so we just have to make sure that we are prepared for the coming storm. And we're ready for it. We'll recognize it when we see it. We'll hold on to that teaching of Christ so that we can endure. The fact is, the rain is going to fall in our lives. The floods and winds are going to blow against us. And so we must prepare our houses so that they don't fall. If we can know ahead of time what's going to happen to us, well, then we'll be prepared. You ever see the people live in these danger areas in Florida or along the Gulf Coast, and they're watching the weather, and they can see the hurricane coming. You know what they do? They get the plywood and cover their windows up. They get the sandbags out and put them at the door. They're getting the house ready for the coming storm. That's what we got to do that. Get your house ready for the storm is coming. Have you ever seen, and I'm sure living where we do, we see this from time to time, but a storm passes through, and then there's another band that passes through, and another band that passes, and they say these storms are training. You ever heard that term? Just like a train of railroad cars, one after the other. And our lives might be like that. Just face one trial after trial after trial. But see, if we're ready, if we build our house on the rock, if we hear the words of Jesus and do them, well, then we'll be ready for the storms when they come. That's our second question. I get behind on my PowerPoints. I forget to advance them. And so there's the way we've answered that. Life's challenges that would destroy our relationship with God and hope of eternal life. We've talked about some specific ones. Well, then our last question is this. What's the difference between the wise man and the foolish man? Now, we've kind of referred to that all along as we've gone through, but I want to specify and highlight it at this point. Well, what's the difference between them? They got a lot of similarities, don't they? Jesus tells about two men. They're both building a house. And they both experience wind and flood and rain. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? You see, the wise man experiences the same things the foolish man experiences. The wise man, he experiences the wind just like the foolish man. The wind isn't any different between the wise man and the foolish man, nor is the rain, nor is the flood. We're going to experience the same things in life that everybody else experiences. The difference is, have we prepared our lives for them? You see, the wise man's house does not stand because he does not experience the rain. That's what we think sometimes. If I follow Jesus, I'm going to have a big rain shield out here. God's going to put up a big barrier, and I'm not going to feel it. No. You see, the wise man's house didn't stand because he did not experience those things. He experienced the same thing the foolish man experienced. He had just prepared for it. That's the difference. Well, here are the difference. There's really only one difference. What little word? So let's read that again. Therefore, everyone who hears the words of mine and does them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And then verse 26, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them. You see the difference? The wise man, they both hear. The wise man hears and does. The foolish man just hears. And he doesn't do the words of Jesus. It's the doing that's different, isn't it? Now that reminds me of James chapter 1. Does it remind you of James chapter 1? James chapter 1. And remember, James is very much like the Sermon on the Mount. A lot of similar ideas. Well, in James chapter 1, beginning in verse 22, James says, prove yourselves doers of the word and not merely hearers who delude themselves. If anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. Once he has looked at himself and gone away, he immediately has forgotten what kind of person he was. But the one who looks intently at the perfect law, the law of liberty, and abides in it, not having become a forgetful hearer, but an effectual doer. And I like that last part of it. You see, this man will be blessed in his doing. It's the doing that makes the difference. Not the hearing. Everybody can hear. It's the doing that makes the difference. Doing, practicing, obeying, keeping, abiding in are all biblical ways of describing how we must respond to Jesus' teaching if we want to succeed. Well, I'm just about out of time, Philip. I know we're going to sing, so I don't want to go too long. So what did he teach? If we must hear and do what he teaches, well, what did he teach? Well, let's look at the Sermon on the Mount. It's a good place to start. You've got to develop the right attitude. You need to be poor in spirit. You need to mourn. You need to be meek. You need to hunger and thirst for righteousness. You need to be merciful, pure in heart, and a peacemaker. And you need to be happy, in a sense, even when you're persecuted. You got to develop that right attitude. You got to do it. The difference in the doing. It's not just knowing that's what we ought to do. It's doing. We've got to exceed the external righteousness of the Pharisees by developing the inner man. That's Matthew chapter 5 and verse 20, exceeding the righteousness of the Pharisees. We develop the inner man. We control our emotions like anger and lust. We honor our commitments. Remember, Jesus talks about divorce here in the Sermon on the Mount. The one who puts away his wife except for fornication makes her an adulteress. You have to honor your commitments. It highlights marriage. We need to be people of integrity, not people who through sleight of hand take advantage of others for their own advantage. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. You be that kind of person of integrity. And if you tell somebody yes, they have confidence that what you mean is yes. It's not that you got your fingers crossed behind your back or in some sleight of hand way you're going to mislead them. No, that's not what Jesus taught. Before you criticize others, be sure your own lives are in order. Chapter 7 and verse 1. Treat others the way you want them to treat you. Chapter 7 and verse 12. He tells us, be careful about religious practice. Now, there are a lot of religious people out there who are practicing religion, but they're doing it incorrectly and in a way that doesn't please God. You see, many people do religious things to be seen of men. They like the praise of men. Oh, you're a great guy. They like the congratulations and slaps on the back and the adulation. They like the profit they get from it. Oh, you're a wonderful, godly man. Let me send you my money. And they're willing to take it. So their motives are all wrong. They like the power that comes when they impress people with their piety. I've never seen so much Bible waving and cross wearing as we see in the political season. I can get some power if I convince these people that I'm this kind of person. You be careful about that. These people are hypocrites. Don't be like them. Simple, sincere, quiet devotion is sufficient to please God. Understand that some religious people are deceived. Or didn't we cast out demons in your name? Did we do many mighty works? Dramatic, extravagant, flamboyant, grandiose, pompous, pretentious works do not commend us to God. Obedience commends us to God. Doing God's will commends us to Him. Beware of those who would lead you astray. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. Now you can identify them by their fruit. You've got to look beyond their superficial appearance and see what they're producing in order to determine their true character. Now, don't get caught up in the affairs of this life. Don't be worried about having enough food or clothing. Trust your Father. Seek to please Him first in your life. Lay up treasure in heaven, and He'll provide for you. And be content with His provision. And finally, remember, the way to eternal life can be demanding and difficult. And not many are willing to make the necessary commitment to do what's necessary to enter in. But understand these things and be strong in your commitment to the Lord. Enter the narrow way, the difficult one. You can do that. Now, a lot of people are not willing to, but you can. You can do that if you will. Well, let's wrap it up. The conclusion is this, that Jesus told his disciples that they could have a home in heaven. He says, I'm going away. There are many dwelling places or mansions in my Father's house, and you can come where I am, and you can have that eternal home in heaven. Paul says that we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. And Jesus teaches us to be faithful so that they will receive you into eternal dwellings. Luke 16 and verse 9. And just as we spend our lives here laying up treasure in heaven, we spend our lives here building our home in heaven. And we do that, build that home in heaven where there's rest and peace and glory. We do that by building our house here and now on the rock. The teaching of Jesus, hearing it and doing it, preparing for the storms that are going to come. If we do that, Jesus, the Son of God, tells us we can endure. If you're here tonight and you're not a disciple of Jesus, we want to give you an opportunity to respond to the invitation this evening. If you've never confessed the name of Jesus, if you believe that in your heart, if you've never confessed that, we encourage you to do that tonight. Now, repent of your sins, and then submit to the command to be baptized. That's part of the teaching of Jesus, hearing it and doing it. That's the important thing. And so put that into practice if you've never done that. If you've already done that, but you haven't been following in the steps of Jesus, and you need to make some corrections, we encourage you to do that as well. And so if you're subject to the invitation, we can help you in any way. We invite you to come.